Hey everyone, it's Neflarian with another familiar video from Fen-Ri's Omen down, World Boss Tier 16 and down, and the 13th raid. Again, I'm not going over every familiar, but more so just the ones you might want to keep an eye on when you're in that tier, and I will only mention ones that can be obtained from within that tier. So even if a schematic is available or some of the parts are, I'm not going to talk about it until you can actually make them. I also don't talk about invasion or expedition familiars, those will be separate videos. If you missed my other videos, check them out as those familiars will carry you through this tier as well. In Tier 16, we got a new world boss in Nordic Dream, and there's definitely an amazing familiar found within. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see what we can find. First is Bruagaya. He's a tank. He's got 5% fire resistance, 15% damage reduction, and 5% deflect. He's not the best, and there's so many other tanks I've talked about, but again, if you happen to need a tank, specifically a fire tank, he's not a bad option. Stat spread is 44, 43, 7. He has a 0 SP ability to shield himself, the ability to do some combustion, but overall he's just kind of there if you need him. I wouldn't really spend that much time on him. Up next is Haefia. This is a healer. They have air adrenaline 10, so you get some extra air damage, which is helpful for that 0 SP where you're bleeding. Their big deal though is they've got 25% chance to cleanse whenever they heal. So every time you heal your teammate, there's a chance to remove any stacks like shock or combustion or bleed from them. Their stat spread is okay. It's 52, 17, 25. I wish there was less power and more speed because you're wanting to heal as many times as possible. And I wish there was a little bit more stamina, but the stamina is high enough that there's quite a few baits that can bait for this familiar. Tons of heal skills, you can see that on your screen there. And then there's also some bleed at the 0 SP as I had mentioned, so they can do a little bit of damage. Next we have Jacklin, which is a pretty strong DPS. Honestly, it's a water DPS, so there's quite a bit of freeze. They have built-in water damage, dual strike, and quad strike, so they're gonna be multi-hitting a ton. Stat spread is 28, 18, 49, so I mean, it's actually really good. Most baits can bait for this familiar and lots of hitting going on, so you're gonna freeze the enemy quite often. For the longest time, freeze didn't work. I don't know if you guys know that, but it does work now. And this pairs really well with that Hector set because whenever the enemy gets frozen, they get a ton of damage dealt on him. By himself, not my favorite, but he does actually do a pretty good job. People do sleep on him. The mythic familiar this tier is Thundmolf. You can check my video kind of linked up above there on that tag to look at me making him. This was the first mythic familiar that I spent a ton of time on other than Thetheus. He's got built-in 20% electric resistance, 15% absorb. So the damage reduction is conditional on electric, but you can stack damage reduction augments on him. The absorb chance is huge. He's gonna be able to get a lot of absorb. Stat spread is really great, 76, 15, 9, so you can bait for pretty much any familiar out there. He does have some 0 SP self-sustain. The shock on 0 SP works really well with other shock familiars, deals quite a bit of damage, and at that 1 SP, the Ragnarok's Fury gives healing to all of your teammates and also gives Fury, which is just like Enrage, but it's required to be used on their next turn, so he makes all of your other familiars and yourself do more damage as well. Honestly, like, he's amazing. As a bait, he's a little bit more offensively focused than defense, but I use him constantly. I love this familiar so much. Tier 16 introduced a new world boss in Nordic Dream. This is where you're going to want to spend a ton of time. You spend a bunch of time in Titans for Thetheus. Nordic is the next one where you spend just so much time to get all of those runic echoes. The first familiar to talk about is Fen-Ri. It's a DPS with some purification on there, 7.5% electric damage, 30% crit chance, which is really nice, so they'll crit more, and then the purification. Their stat spread they're so fast, 19, 16, 59. Their main downside is that stamina though, being only 16.2%. There's just not a lot of baits that can bait for this familiar, but if you do have one, a lot of people sleep on this guy just because of his stamina. Tons of shock going on, tons of multi-hits. You are going to essentially be ricocheting everywhere with all those multi-hits. This familiar will do a ton of damage. Speaking of baits that might be able to bait for him though, you have Torg, found in the same area, 30% electric resistance and 2.5% absorb, so he's almost like Thundmolf, just not as good. But his stat spread of 62, 16, 17 means that he can bait for familiars like Fen-Ri, so that's actually a really good option. He does have a little bit of self-sustain and he can heal your teammates, but he also has a lot of shock. He's like a less good Thundmolf, but he can bait for those other familiars. Definitely don't sleep on this guy. He's actually pretty good. The bane of every single Nordic run is Voluspa. This familiar will wreck your team, and so why not put them on your team? This DPS has 5% electric damage, 200% crit damage, and 10% accuracy, so there are going to be some defensive modifiers like block and evade and deflect that you can just cut by 10%, making the enemies just not as tanky. This works really bad when you're the tank, but if you're the DPS, this is amazing. Their stat spread is really good too, 41, 18, 37, so they're really fast, they're still hitting pretty hard. A lot of familiars can still bait for them, and they have so many shock skills. So many. 0 SP, 1 SP, 2 SP, like all over the place, you're shocking. And every time you shock, it's also applying another proc there, so you get to have your brains proc more as well. So he's just dealing out an insane amount of damage, bypassing some evade, bypassing some block. This is a familiar that until you're able to make something different is going to be one of your better options. That something different though is Lerky, and Lerky uses Voluspa, so go ahead and make your Voluspa so you can get into Lerky. This is the mythic familiar from Nordic. 10% electric damage, 15% empower, 15% dual strike, and 5 bolster. So you're doing more damage, you're having a higher chance to do double damage and a higher chance to hit twice, and bolster spreads shield for that number. So for Lerky it's 5% whenever you hit an enemy, so you're doing a lot of built-in shielding as well. Stat spread is phenomenal, 27, 17, 56, so quite a, like, you do have to have a special bait, but once you have one that can bait for him, he's got one of the best stat spreads possible. A ton of multi-hits, tons of shock, and there's even a built-in EMP through the 3x shock skill. You're going to apply 3 stacks of shock and be able to EMP. If you dual strike with that, you're just deleting the team at that point. Lerky is the best DPS familiar that you're going to get. I would very much argue he's the best DPS that's currently in the game. Not just in this tier, but even going further. There's some arguments for some other ones, but I believe fully that Lerky is the best one. I personally own 8 of them, so I can have 3 of them on my team, all fully stabled. This is a phenomenal familiar, 1000% worth all of the runic echoes you have to make. And if I remember right, it's 105 runic echoes per Lerky, 100% worth it. Those are the familiars that I wanted to mention from tier 16. There are quite a few because of Nordic being added. Thundmolf and Lerky in particular are both fairly expensive, but they synergize super well with each other through shock skills. Is there a familiar you think I skipped over that should have been included? What are your favorite familiars? Let me know in the comments down below, and good luck on your grind for the best familiars. If you want to discuss this video, my past videos, and suggest future ones, check out my Discord, linked in the description down below. You'll find a helpful and hyped community to get all of the news regarding your favorite games. Big giveaways and events hosted for the Bitverse will be mentioned there, so with any luck you can win things like XXL packs or Ultra Gores. By being a part of my community, you won't ever miss a chance to enter those, and there will even be exclusive giveaways as we grow for members of my community. I hope to see you there, and thanks for hanging out today. If you want to support me in getting better equipment or making more videos, check out the link on my channel, and don't forget to like this video if you like it, dislike it if you dislike it, subscribe if you want more, and I will see you in the next video.